Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Kamini, and I'm your host. My guest today is Jasmina Byrne, Chief of Foresight and Policy at UNICEF. Jasmina has over 25 years of experience working on children's rights, and she's currently leading a team that analyzes global trends and future scenarios, focusing on everything from digital governance to climate to geopolitics and what all of this means for children around the world. Welcome, Jasmina.
Thank you, Kamini, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us. Jasmina, can you explain to us what you do at UNICEF? I have to say, Chief of Foresight and Policy sounds like you are looking into a crystal ball or something. What does it actually mean day to day?
Uh, yes, it's an interesting question because, of course, I did so many different things before I became a chief of foresight, and worked for the past 15 and 20 years on the intersection of digital technologies, children's rights, and policy. But lately, in particular, in the past several years, UNICEF and other UN agencies have started building their capabilities to think and analyze the trends and anticipate global challenges in order to help the organization prepare better for the future, and in order, particularly for UNICEF, in order to understand how children's lives could be impacted by all these different global trends and challenges. So, foresight is a discipline, and I would say also a mindset that pushes us and nudges us to think about potential futures. And I say futures in plural because it is not a crystal ball. Of course, we cannot predict the future, nobody can. But we can anticipate where certain trends are taking us. Like we look at the climate change, digital developments, AI, and then to think what is this desired future that we want, and what policymakers need to do in order to help us reach that desired future. So this is why foresight as a discipline uses a lot of different tools and methods like horizon scanning, scenario development to help us understand both the best case scenarios and the worst case scenarios, the probability of these scenarios happening, the potential impact of these issues, and to help us really understand what course of action we need to take now in order to prevent negative things from happening, but also to maximize on the positive and the opportunities that some of these trends are providing us.
That sounds a lot like risk management, which was my profession for many, many years. Uh, I hear you when you say desired futures or desired outcomes, because you're looking at a number of scenarios, and obviously, in a polycrisis world, there's a number of variables that are subject to change all the time. So, in terms of specifically how the future might impact children, what are some of the issues that you are looking at?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned risk scenarios, and I deliberately said opportunities as well as risks, because there is a whole science around systemic risk and a focus on how to avert and avoid risks. But foresight also offers us more insight into where we should capitalize on the opportunities that present themselves. So for children, this future or the futures will look very different also depending on where children live, whether they live in high income countries, whether they live in lower income countries, where geographically they live. It will very much depend on their environment, from what their immediate environment will look like family situation. But also it will depend on these other external factors and forces that can impact everybody's lives, but can also impact children. So, how is climate change going to affect children in their communities? And we know that children are most susceptible to the impact of climate change as being most vulnerable. How are technology developments, artificial intelligence, going to impact their learning, their preparation for the future jobs, how it will impact potentially their way of interacting, the way of uh, engaging with others. All these things are things that we need to be aware of and to track and to see what happens now in order to understand where the trends are taking us and what will happen in the future. And I think we can, when it comes to technology, we can learn already quite a lot from the past. If we look, for example, at how children use social media, how they are engaging on the internet, some of uh, the lessons that we learned from the past can be applied today, and we need to be ready to apply them in the future, particularly with regard to technologies that are rapidly developing and that will be important in the years to come.
I'm just fascinated about how, when you mentioned, specifically children's rights, and then you mentioned the different types of circumstances that children across the world live in. From a policy perspective, you mentioned that, the part of your job is to anticipate global challenges and opportunities and forecast this with the intention of providing feedback to policy development. So how do you actually say, here is this huge range of circumstances that children live across the world, and how do you actually pull that into an all-encompassing policy?
I think it depends on the policy and depends on the issue. Obviously, we not all policies are going to be global policies. Certain issues that affect all of us are going to be global in nature, like climate change and technology development. But there's others, like demographic changes, will very much depend on the region and the country. And political, economic developments will also be very different in different countries. So having said that, we need to kind of be prepared to work both at the local, national, and at the global level in order to understand the impact of these changes and to work with policymakers to set up frameworks that will facilitate and help maximize these benefits. For example, if we look at the African continent, the majority of children will be there. Africa is a very young continent with a lot of children and young people, and we're already working with some of the governments in African countries to help them actually understand what the future for children in their countries will look like, given the rapid demographic change and the fact that children will be constituting more than half of the population in some of the countries. So this is really commendable because they are thinking ahead. They are already applying foresight in their thinking, strategic foresight in their thinking about what policies do we need to prepare now to make sure that children uh, thrive in the future, that they get the best education that they deserve, that they have the best jobs they could get on the market, and so on. So really, it will depend on the question, and that will also decide what stakeholders we need to engage with at which level.
Thanks for that. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned Africa, because looking at the global south, I'd like to think that I'm a techno optimist. And we hear about AI being the great equalizer, the promise of that. And we hear that AI will democratize access to education, healthcare, information. And in your work specifically with children in developing countries, are you seeing this playing out, or is it marketing? And what are we talking about when we talk about AI and children in developing countries? Uh, can you expand on that?
Sure. I think this is a really good question. I think it cuts to the core of the current challenges we have with AI. So there is a lot of optimism that AI can democratize access to education, healthcare, information, and that promise is real. We have to be aware of that this is real and it is already happening in many countries. We see AI tools helping teachers in the classroom. We see personalized learning, AI tutors. We can talk about particularly technology in education a little bit more if you'd like. But I think what is important to understand that these examples are still very much isolated in the sense that in the developing countries. So we are seeing almost a different uptake of AI in high-income countries and in the developing countries, and that's why we see that this reality is really going to be mixed. I mean, there are several reasons for that. First of all, uh, developing countries are still struggling with the basic access to internet. We still haven't reached the universal access. Some communities are struggling with access to electricity. In education settings, the challenge of bringing technology and AI is real because many classrooms are overcrowded, teachers lack resources they need, and this is a challenge that is still presented by the issues that we faced in the past. And when I said that there's a lot we can learn from the way we interacted with technology in the past, when I think about the AI, I'm also thinking about how do we ensure the equitable and equal access. That's one thing. But the other thing is also that 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 most of these AI systems are developed by a handful of countries and big tech companies, and the benefits are not equally distributed across the globe. So what we see, for example, the data that powers these big systems does not always reflect local realities because the systems are based and trained on the data that is generated from high-income countries. Then there is a question of cost. Development of these systems is very costly, and we know that in developing countries, to be able to develop these technologies requires investments, resources, skills, and currently these skills are concentrated more in high income countries. And then when we talked about the fact that the systems are developed in high income countries, the data that is powering this system is mostly generated from the users in high income countries. That kind of almost introduces a bias that can affect people in developing countries, because then the question is, will these technologies really serve them? And how can we make sure that that these technologies and the data that is collected through them really reflect local realities and serves local populations and communities? So we are looking at all these questions in UNICEF, and that's why we talk that without strong AI governance and data governance, it would be hard to really apply AI in a way that is equalizing benefits across the world.
Thanks, Jasmina. I like that you raised the point of bias. Will these technologies serve children in the developing countries? I remember a couple of weeks ago I had a discussion about this very thing about techno-colonialism and the loss of indigenous language and culture systems as a result of these uh, systems being programmed and developed in the global north. And what we are essentially doing is that we are, I don't know whether it's subtle or not, but we are actually devaluing and systematically stripping people of their sense of identity. Is that something you worry about in terms of talking about AI and children's education?
Well, when I talk about children, AI, data, all these things are interconnected. There are many things that I worry about, and you talked about bias. That's definitely one of the things, because, as I said, how this data that is the data itself can be biased. Let's face it. So if the data that feeds into this AI system is not the data that is free from bias, discrimination, that equally represents all the groups in society and the most marginalized, then of course the systems will be biased as well. And when it comes to children, they are the most vulnerable in society. Uh, their data is collected from their birth, from the moment when they're registered at birth, through health systems, through education systems, through various other biometric data that is also being collected about children. So, given that there's a possibility of bias and discrimination, then we need to be really very careful about how this data is managed, processed, used, minimized, and really apply for the benefits of children. So there are various other things that can also lead to negative consequences for children, and I like to say that hinder the realization of their rights, in fact, is also if their data is used for the purposes that is not intended, often sold to companies that use it for targeted marketing to children, particularly through education. And we've done recently quite a lot of work on children's data in education and how best to govern this data. And we see that breaches of data in education systems are quite common. We see that edtech providers who actually work with schools by providing these tools are using data for unintended purposes and then send children some advertising or sell this information to somebody else. So these are all the things that worry us when it comes to children, because it's about their privacy, it's about their security, it's about their agency and their ability to understand what is actually happening with their data. And children are less able than adults to really understand how this data is used and potentially misused through various technologies, whether it's through education, whether it's through health, or even through social media data that is collected from children through social media. So these are all the concerns we have, and that's why we have worked over the past several years to make sure that we as an organization set certain principles, recommendations for various stakeholders on how to deal particularly with children's data that enables their right to be realized and protected in various settings, and most recently in education setting, as you mentioned.
I don't know, but that just upset me so much to hear that companies, through the Agency of Education, use children's data without their permission or knowledge, and that sounds extremely exploitative. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's a kind of a common issue in use of tech, and we have done some analysis of personalized learning that particularly uses education technologies and AI, and the benefits and risks of personalized learning. And while there are a lot of benefits from tech, let's start with that first. Like the education technologies can revolutionize education as long as, of course, they help with the educational outcomes, but also data collected through education technologies can be beneficial for schools, for administrators, for those who are preparing school plans, for local authorities to understand how children are learning, what their outcomes are, how to use that data to actually improve the teaching methods, and so on. But very often, the companies that provide these ed tech platforms do not have very strong data protection policies in place. And we found out that only about 40% of those who worked on personalized learning in developing countries actually had data protection policies in place. And that ranges from very small companies, startups, or bigger companies, and so on. When children and their guardians give a consent to use of these technologies, they don't always understand that the owners of these platforms can actually use this data for various different purposes. And that is really upsetting, as you say, when you see that this data is not used for what it is intended, but it is used for other purposes like advertising, marketing to children, and sometimes even advertising products that are not necessarily suitable for children or they are not in their best interest. So what is the challenge here is that very often school authorities themselves don't know how these EdTech systems work. And often this is like a black box almost to say, particularly when AI is introduced into the picture. We also found through our analysis of EdTech and children's data that there's a real disconnect between local authorities, government policymakers, schools, EdTech companies, and that it requires, and data protection authorities, which are kind of the independent regulators at the national level. So what we really try to do is to look at all these stakeholders holistically and to see who has which role to play to ensure that children's data that is collected through the education system is used in a way that actually benefits children, and how they should collaborate and work together, who has a responsibility for what, and so on. So yes, as you say, it is very concerning, but there is hope, obviously, that many policymakers and data protection authorities are taking this very seriously. I just returned from a Global Privacy Assembly last 2 weeks ago, actually, where we had a panel with several data protection authorities from Canada, the Philippines, Korea, and we big tech companies like Microsoft, who are all committed really to making it right and to use this technology for good and to use this technology to benefit children as opposed to extrapolate and extract their data for commercial use only.
Well, you are talking about a topic that is really trending at the moment, which is the power dynamics in AI today.
Yeah.
And what does this look? Because you say, well, Microsoft decides out of the goodness of their heart to do this, and you know, I'm being a bit blunt here, but the fact is that it solely depends on them deciding to do this favor, as it were. You know, there's no reason for them to be compelled to do the right thing. So it's a question of it's at their mercy that we are doing right by children. But going back to the topic of power dynamics, what does this actually mean in relation to children and the communities in which they live? And
Yeah.
should multinational IT companies making decisions that are beneficial to those communities when they could well decide not to make those decisions? Should it be as flimsy as that, if I could put it that way?
Yeah, I think doing things out of the goodness of their heart, as you say, is or because there's a corporate responsibility, so to say, social responsibility. It's a good way forward. We also want to see companies to self-regulate, not only to be have the regulation enforced on them. And there is regulation. We have GDPR, which has an effect beyond EU and has already been used and adopted by many other countries. We have seen that a lot of countries are adopting children's codes that are dealing with children's privacy and protections, like starting with the UK, and now there's also an effect of these countries doing that. And obviously, companies are bound by these policies and regulations, but I think uh, it has to also come from them as something that they want to do preemptively, because it takes a lot of time to develop regulation and policies. And if companies are on board and want to do these preemptive work around protection and safeguard of children's privacy and their data, then of course this is commendable. But when it comes to power dynamics, you're right, there is a big power disconnect between the big tech companies and communities and children who live in these communities. We see that that is, as I mentioned earlier, these systems are developed in rich countries and then deployed in different countries equally without actually any engagement by the local community. So this is the biggest kind of power imbalance where we are seeing now between the north and the south, where the countries in the south are more like data providers, so to say, where the other ones are the ones who are extrapolating their data, that data for their own gain and for their benefit. And I think the alternative to this is really to build local capacity, public data infrastructure, governance frameworks at a local level, open source language models. There are so many things that can be done, but that requires serious investments from local authorities, from policymakers, and so on. There is another power imbalance here that I would say is about a child and an adult, and that adult could be a parent, could be a teacher, a corporation, government official, and we really need to be mindful of the fact that children, based on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, have also right to have their opinions heard, and we often talk about right of participation as an important right and a principle of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So in order to give children agency in the matters that affect them, we need to be able to listen to them. We need to be able to engage with them. We need to be able to talk to them about what matters to them, what they actually want from technology, how can technology best serve them. And currently that is not happening. And back in 2016, maybe more, almost 10 years ago, I worked with Professor Sonia Livington and John Carr on a short paper that was called One in Three, Internet Governance and Children. And through our research, we found out that 1 in 3 internet users is a child, and in developing countries, that's half. So 1 in 2 internet users is a child. So when we look at it like that, then we realize how vast this children's demographic is and how important they are in the context of internet, digital technologies, AI, anything. But when policies are developed, when different platforms are developed, the children access that are not specific to children, but they access because based on tech policies, they can access once they are over 13. They are not designed with a child in mind. These are designed with an adult in mind, with an adult user, with a person over 18 years old who may have more capacity to understand these things. So that's why that power imbalance between a child and adult who makes decisions that ultimately impact children is critical, and we need to address it by giving children voice in all the matters that affect them. And in this case, when we talk about technology, given that children are impacted by technologies so much, we need to hear their voices in how these technologies are developed, how they're deployed, how they're used, and ultimately, what do they want? How do we get internet and AI that serves them?
So just two things. I think that 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African by 2030. I think that's the figure. And so we're looking at Africa, and it's got a very, very young population.
Yes.
And to think that there are the guardrails and the development of children, or the protection of children in the development of these systems is very much lagging behind in Africa. So, firstly, what can we do about that? And secondly, I want to ask you a bit of a controversial question. Is that you mentioned history and learning the lessons from the past. And when you said that, immediately I thought about environmental protection laws in the West and pollution, and those things look very, very nice in the West. But what happens learning from the lessons of the past in history? What do we need to guard against going forward, knowing what happened in the past?
Yeah, I think that is a very important question, particularly as you say, we have all these environmental climate policies that are benefiting actually so far mostly those populations in the developed countries and not so much populations in developing countries. That's why we have policies like loss and damage funds and others who are trying to kind of make right by the past injustices when it comes to pollution that is now affecting disproportionately the people in the developing countries where they were the least responsible for the climate change because it happened due to rapid industrialization. And we know the story. So I think we can absolutely apply that also to the development of technologies like AI and quantum computing, anything new that is coming out of the West or the North now. And to make sure really that we bring these diverse voices from around the world when we design and decide about these technologies. And there are different efforts at the UN level. We have like the new scientific panel that was, well, it's yet to be appointed, but the members are yet to be appointed. But the UN scientific panel that was established and announced at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago will bring scientists and experts from around the world to talk about AI and the scientific developments of AI and where they're going. We also have high-level panels that look at also policies around AI and technologies. And this is where these voices and engagement from diverse groupings of countries need to be involved and represented. I think there are different avenues where countries from Africa and other developing countries can actually make their voices heard in the policy domain and the policy field when it comes to development of these technologies and investments into development. I think homegrown solutions that we are seeing in some places in Africa already emerging are very important. For various different reasons. I mean, we talked about the biases, but there's also a question about language understanding. You talk about large language models. Without use of local languages, these models are not going to necessarily serve all the populations. So, ensuring and enabling the pipeline of developers in lower income countries or in African countries in this case, it is very important. And that is where, because Africa is the youngest continent and is having a demographic bulge and hopefully a demographic dividend, it's important to incentivize policymakers in Africa to invest now in the pipeline of developers in the future. So we talked about foresight. This is exactly something that the foresight practitioners can help with and say, like, where do you want to invest now in education, in skills development, in order to ensure that you benefit most from the demographic dividend and that you actually, in that period, also take the opportunity to benefit and drive the development of the new technologies as well that serving your populations and the problems that you need to face. Because I think, let's face it, and I'm not the only one, of course, a lot of people are talking about recently about the debate on how important it is to engage communities in the development of technology so that we are not uh, developing this technology for the sake of innovation and then see what it could do, but to actually develop these technologies to help us address current issues and challenges and problems. And the communities can help with that. How do you develop AI that can serve a generation of workers? There's a lot of fear also that AI is going to replace a whole cohort of different workers because of automation, because of robotics, because of coding, and so on. But that could be the case if we don't engage with these workers today to see how they can benefit from AI. Can we develop AI technologies that can help the workers be more productive and that can help the companies do better eventually and the whole society because we actually engaged with people who are going to be affected by these technologies. So I would say without Africa, there is no future in AI because we know that it is very important for a cohort of population in the world. And the majority of users are going to be there. So it is essential that African population is involved in both the policy and the technological development and deployment of these emerging technologies.
Lessons from the past. If you do not co-create and indigenize your solutions and create co-ownership, it's not going to work. So I absolutely agree with you. When you're co-creating solutions, you have to have the community involved, or is it just won't work. I mean, history has shown us again and again. You literally think about future scenarios for a living. When you think about AI and children in developing countries 5 to 10 years from now, what are the scenarios, best case, worst case? And I'm glad that you actually said Africa is the focus, and Africa is definitely the future. So that has to be our focus.
So yeah, it's hard to say. As I say, it's not a crystal ball. We can look at different potential futures and possible futures. And the best case is, as we just spoke about it, it is the AI that is locally developed, uses diverse data for different population and groups in a responsible, ethical way that supports children's learning and well-being, and it's governed through inclusive ethical frameworks. Now, perhaps the worst case scenario, in my opinion, and here I'm not talking about existential threat of AI, which many people are talking, is really a missed opportunity. And I think that's something that we need to think about how we can make sure that AI that is being developed now can help consumers or developers, children, and others in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we miss this boat now, then I think this is really going to snowball and create even more problems in the future. So for me, the worst scenario is really missing the opportunity to engage, to work with people in Africa and communities, with policymakers, with developers. And it's not only a missed opportunity for Africa, it's going to be a missed opportunity for the world as well. And making this world more fit for children of different ages, different demographics, and also the world that really serves the humanity.
I have to be honest.
Maybe that's not what you had in mind when you said the worst scenario.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We have to hear what we have to hear. When I think about future and what could be the possible worst case scenario, it's just for me it will be magnifying the inequalities.
Inequality, yeah.
And just replicating the past where you create an underclass which is the supporting and basically the serfdom that raises up or supports this AI and AGI development, but at the end of the day they don't manifestly benefit from that system.
Exactly. So yeah, absolutely. And when I said missed opportunity, I meant like if we don't take this opportunity, that's where we'll end up. So with an unequal world, with amplified inequalities and even more difficulties to bridge that gap that currently already exists.
But then again, if I see a future, the best case scenario, it's Africa rising and Africa creating their own solutions and defining their own success. And what that looks like, I don't know, but it definitely won't be a Western version of what our success should look like, but something that we define by ourselves, whatever that means.
I think it's already happening in many places in African big cities. In particular, we are seeing really a push for locally developed tech solutions, and I think this is the future. This is how we need to go. I think it is a bit of a risk when it comes to regulation and frameworks, the legal frameworks. There's a bit of a risk of that kind of fragmentation um, when it comes to technology. But I think on the one hand, frameworks and guide rails need to be universal and need to be, particularly when it comes to vulnerable populations like children, whereas the solutions have to be local. And we see that we've also written quite a lot in our work about innovation in children's data governance. So showcasing some good case studies like sandboxing and RegTech and various different examples of where we see these homegrown innovations happening and how they can then take hold and be scaled up later on to benefit children. And I think we need more of that, obviously, and we need to be able to document these cases, to share with others, to make them known to the rest of the world so that they understand that uh, good solutions can be found in all corners of the globe and the places that you sometimes least expect it. And I think we have already examples that we can quote when it comes to how children's data governance is evolving in some of these places. But you're right, it requires much more, it requires a lot more investment and scaling up and support and also platforms, global platforms to hear about this solution.
So there's a lot of worried parents out there because we can't even compare. We could possibly, I mean, at my age, I can compare. It would be measurably the same, my parents' childhood and my childhood. But parents these days face raising their children in a scenario where they have no way of determining how they should guide their children through this hyper innovation that we're going through. What practical advice can you share?
Uh, yeah, it's a tough question. I used to work in the office of research in the past, and part of my research was, in addition to leading kind of research on digital technologies, was around parenting and parenting in general, as opposed and parenting in the digital age. And uh, parenting is tough for any age group, for young children, for adolescents in particular, because you need to respect their agency, their provide them enough guidance and support, but also to be able to give them enough autonomy to explore the world on their own. And when it comes to technology, digital platforms are their playgrounds nowadays. So this is where children and young people, adolescents, spend a lot of their time, and parents need to kind of balance this approach to kind of providing too much guidance and protection to the point where it becomes controlling and where children's privacy gets compromised. To balance this with giving children the right space to explore and autonomy and to know how to deal with risks and to face different risks. So it's like putting when you bring a child to a playground, you need to let them play on their own, but you need to give them advice on and to make sure first that the playground is safe. Yeah, that if they fall, there's a soft padding on the ground. So that is equivalent to the social media platforms and platforms that children inhabit. We need to make sure that they are, first of all, safe for children and that the tech companies do their job. But the parents' role here would be to provide guidelines, guidance, to provide support, to provide uh, space for conversation. And we can for sure meet and see that a lot of parents won't even understand what is happening in this digital world. They won't understand necessarily the terms of engagement. They don't want to understand the rules, the consent forms. The consent form in itself of many of the social media companies is so difficult to understand. For a 13-year-old or a parent may not even understand the legal language. That may happen. But what is important is that parents are there for their children, that they have open communication, that children can talk to them if they encounter issues and problems. And it's just like a good parenting skills that you would exercise outside of the digital world. You need to be able to apply also in the digital world. And that if neither a child nor a parent don't know how to deal with a certain digital issue or a situation, they know where to seek help and who to contact in order to understand. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this theme of parenting is really about being a good parent. And nowadays, I mean, parents are of smaller, younger children are millennials. They've grown with the technology, so they understand technology much better than the generations X and others who are much older.
What I wanted to ask you is, and I can't remember where I read this, and it was saying that the childhood of children needs to be protected. What does that actually mean? The childhood of children need to be protected. So basically they're saying children deserve a childhood. What would that mean to you? I mean, I read that in I can't remember where, but it was basically talking about something to the effect that the innocence of children and that stage that they go through needs to be protected in this digital age that we are. How do you actually do that? Because as you said, the playground of children now is online.
Uh, that's true. And then when they're online, they may be exposed to things that are not suitable to their age. And that's where I said there is an important role that platforms have to play in ensuring that children have access to the age appropriate content. And things that they can understand that it can be appropriate for their age and their use. Um, I don't know. It's a really difficult question, Kamini, because I feel like uh, this is how it is nowadays. Technology is here and it's going to stay. The solution is not necessarily keeping children away from technology because they'll find ways to get hold of it. And if you keep them away from technology for longer, at the point when they start engaging with technology, they may lack the skills that they need to deal with this technology. So what we are seeing now that all the kind of awareness raising or building some kind of safety awareness among children and parents starts at a younger and younger age because children are engaging with technology younger and younger. So I think the best we could do is to help them uh, navigate these spaces as safe as possible, to help them ensure that they are not harmed if they encounter risks, because they are going to encounter various risks online. And research has shown the more time you spend online, the more risks you're going to encounter. If they encounter risks, to know who to turn to, what to do, how to react. And these are the skills that you develop over time. With more interaction with technology, you are going to develop these skills. And let's face it, some of these games and tools that children use online are also very helpful for their own mental health and development. Like some of the gaming apps have been proven to actually help children with cognitive skills development, socialization, you're engaging with different players, and so on and so forth. So we can't alter the fact that the world is moving fast and technology is moving fast. What we can do is to apply some principles of common sense and parenting to make sure that children benefit.
Jasmina, if you had one wish, one thing that could change tomorrow for policymakers or innovators, what would it be?
Okay, so I have several wishes, but like one wish is it's hard to translate it into one wish. But I remember when you and I talked about it, preparing for this podcast, I mentioned that when it comes to children, we need to think about the whole ecosystem around the child. That it takes a village to raise a child. So when it comes to children and technology, children and AI, children and their data, we need to think about the role that various different uh, people in their lives have to play, from parents to teachers to company leaders to government policymakers. They all are actually responsible for children's lives. And so when I put it like that, then I think like, well, what do they all need to do? What do they need to know to be able to kind of think to use this rapidly evolving and developing tech for the benefit of children? And I would say first of all is uh, while AI and other tools and startups are developing very fast, before we actually scale them, we need to think about governance frameworks. And we touched upon a little bit the fact that a regulation develops much more slowly than innovation, and that the tech is developing. On the other hand, there's a lot of kind of talk about like, well, regulation stifles innovation. This is actually not correct. I mean, even if we are not talking about legislation and regulation, there have to be some guardrails and frameworks, which means clear rules on ownership of data, on consent, on accountability, before any of these are scaled up. So that would be my wish. Think about a child first when you're developing these technologies, as children are going to be your first user. And we say if it works for children, it will work for everyone in terms of the governance. Think about the guardrails that you can put in place and the framework that you can put in place, and always start with a threshold of a minimum age, lower the age threshold. Always think about your user as a younger than you think they are. That's one of the things. And the other thing I would say also to various stakeholders is uh, uh, that it is important already now to start thinking about the AI and data literacy, and the same way we talked about media literacy and digital literacy, this needs to be embedded in all the kind of education that the child is given. They need to understand how these systems work, what they're capable of. They need to understand some basic roles of how to use these systems, how to benefit. This is critical, and that has to be that investment. So needs to exist. So on the one hand, responsibility from the developers, from the platforms, from the companies to make sure that they have minimum rules, standards, frameworks applicable before they scale up these technologies. On the other hand, making the literacy around AI data and emerging technologies accessible, available to all. We cannot only put responsibility on a child or a parent for that matter and say like, okay, parent can help the child navigate this space. So that's why I started by saying there's a whole ecosystem around the child and everybody has responsibility. So my wish is really to see that the governments and policymakers and the tech developers see the importance of their products on children, even when they're not designed specifically for children, and to ensure that before they are scaled up for use across various platforms and countries, that they ensure that there's certain protection frameworks put in place to safeguard children.
I absolutely agree with you on literacy and education, and particularly on the African continent, because I mean, if we're looking at we're forecasting, you know, and Africa historically has a history of instability. Ideally, we want to create a future where children are going to grow up in a society where there is trust, there is mutual respect, and there isn't this fragmentation caused by disinformation and misinformation propaganda, because they've been taught from a young age how to engage with this technology and how to get the best possible or the most correct data and information sources that they can. Just, where can people find your work?
Oh, well, a lot of this work is available on the website of Global Office of Research and Foresight, Innocenti. So if they just Google or they just Google data governance, children, UNICEF, I think this work will pop up. There are other great work that is done by my colleagues, both in the same office and across the organization. It's obviously engagement with technologies is an important area of our work. We have teams who work on safeguarding and child protection, particularly protection of children from abuse and exploitation. We didn't talk about it today. We talked mostly about AI and data, but I think anything that they would like to know, just Google on our UNICEF and then the topic that you're interested in. And we've now wrapping up about like 4 or 5 years of work on data governance in particular. We started back in 2020 after the GDPR was developed, and during the COVID times when actually there was a big explosion of use of data and collection of data, because every digital platforms were grown exponentially as everybody was moving to digital platforms due to inability to meet in person. And that work is now culminated in this most recent work on tech and data governance. But we've written and worked with a number of global experts from all over the world on issues related to children, AI, and data. And you can see a number of fantastic short articles, papers that unpack some of these issues, recommendations, policy guidance, videos, and some really helpful material. But what you were saying just before that trust is essential. I think trust in technologies, trust in companies is essential to help everybody really benefit from these great tools and great innovation. And we all need to play an important role in building that trust among children and young people.
Thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. I actually didn't know about all this work that is being done behind the scenes to protect children, and especially design a space in future for the future for children where they can be safe and they can be protected and they can be children, and being done on a global basis. So that's actually fantastic news. And this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having, not just about what can AI do, but what it should do and who it should serve. And it starts with protecting the most vulnerable among us, which is the children. Thanks so much, Jasmina.
Thank you so much, Kamini, and I look forward to hearing the podcast. And good luck with your other episodes. I look forward to listening to them.
Okay, thanks so much, Jasmina. I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.